Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-939. We're going to start off with a doozy, because this SCP is best described as a big, ugly, red, bloody, unhinged jaw fish cave thing with memory loss powers. That's a mouthful, I know, but it's all true. And the last thing you want is for it to get a mouthful of you. Multiple iterations of this lovely cave dweller exist, and they are capable of bearing young, so they can multiply. How nice. 939 is an endothermic pack-based predator adapted to cave life. Its skin is highly permeable to moisture and is a translucent red color thanks to a chemical compound similar to hemoglobin. Kinda like a living blood sausage if you're into that kind of thing. I've heard they're quite delicious, but now I'm thinking about food instead of SCPs. These weird red troglobites are about 2.2 meters tall and weigh around 250 kilograms. They have 4 limbs, each ending with 3 claws and an opposable 4th digit. 939's extremities are covered in short, bristly hair-like structures which are great for climbing. Each has an elongated skull with no eyes or eye sockets, not even a brain casing to be found. But their jaws are lined with red, luminescent fang-like teeth, kind of like a viper fish. That's an ugly sucker right there. Along their dorsal ridges run eye spots and spiny protrusions that are sensitive to light and air pressure respectively. They are likely used to navigate the caves they seem so adapted to and seek out prey. The weird thing about their prey-seeking tendencies though is that they have no apparent need to feed. These hemoglobin hobgoblins are without vital organ systems. No central or peripheral nervous systems, no circulatory systems, no digestive tract. So they have no way of digesting the tissue that they consume, and instead they let it accumulate in their respiratory system till there's too much and then they regurgitate it. Nothing sexier than regurgitating festering meat from your lungs, right? SCP-939 is able to imitate human speech as well, an ability that it uses primarily to lure in victims. It will pretend to be distressed with voices so perfectly imitated biometric voice recognition systems can't tell it apart from whatever it's mimicking. When prey is close enough, it will kill with a single bite to the cranium or neck, usually measured in excess of 35 megapascals. Sometimes I think it would be nice to have my head placed in a hydraulic press, you know? On top of all these horrifying details, 939 also produces an aerosolized Class C amnestics of its own accord. No memories will form for the duration of exposure and for an additional 30 minutes after. Terrifying visage, the ability to play copycat, a skull-crushing bite, and memory inhibition. Let's just say you wouldn't want to meet one of these guys while out spelunking. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-1313. I always thought math was pretty scary on its own. Through my schooling, I found solace in English, philosophy, media studies, but never math. My brain just isn't wired for that kind of thought. Thankfully so, too. I could have been in grave danger had I been too keen on algebra and arithmetic. SCP-1313 is an anomalous series of logical processes capable of being defined as a mathematical equation to which the answer is a single female specimen of Ursus arctos, aka a grizzly bear. I think the proper designation for a grizzly bear is Ursus arctos horribilis, but we'll leave that be for now. In layman's terms, what this means is if you reach the correct answer to the mathematical equation that SCP-1313 represents, a grizzly bear will manifest somewhere close by and start to do what grizzly bears do. Not something you want to deal with in homeroom. The numerical anomaly first came to the Foundation's attention in 1967 when a bear attack was recorded at White Cross High School. Since then, over 1,700 separate incidences of bear attacks in educational institutes has been observed, with over 1,600 fatalities and 20% of the bears still at large. Half solving the problem won't summon any predatory mammals, and there is no way to return the bear to numerical form by solving the inverse. So if you're gonna follow through with this piece of math homework, just be sure you're well equipped to fight a 200-kilogram mama bear. And if you feel that you've personally begun to figure out this equation, get yourself some amnestics as soon as possible. The problem doesn't need to be physically represented. Even solving it in your head will result in the manifestation of a bear. I always knew math was unbearable. I'll see myself out. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-638. Wine and meat. That's the good life, right? Cures what ails you, heals all wounds. Well, if you were to believe SCP-638, then that would be the case. 638 is a male human with a slim build. He's hairless and extensively scarred thanks to a fire that he was found in the remains of. It heals at an abnormal rate, directly proportional to the consumption of raw flesh and wine. Often, 638 will issue demands in the form of 1 or 2 word shouts. In the past, the demands have been things like, like wine, ivy, olive trees, grass for the floor, freedom, women, live animals, a drum, a flute, and a view of the sky. Apparently this guy knows how to live the good life. If these demands are not met, he will become violent and exhibit short bursts of great strength and speed. He's been known to dent steel, easily lift and throw grown men, break restraints, and shout with great force and volume. These shouts can shatter glass and deafen people, even blowing a steel door off its hinges at one point. Fortunately, these outbursts lead to lethargy if he's left without food and wine, so starvation's a pretty effective behavioral control. This SCP, while obviously physically anomalous, has one ability that stands out above the rest. 683 has a strong psychic or empathic influence over women within a radius of about 20 meters. Any woman within that range will be compelled to be in its presence, and once there will lose all inhibition. This often manifests through intense dancing, jumping, and shouting. If they're allowed to continue on, they will dance until they drop from exhaustion. Attempts to remove female subjects result in violent responses from both 638 and affected subjects. This SCP will use these folks in aid to escape, as subjects will also demonstrate greater physical prowess along with a higher level of adrenaline. Once removed from his influence, subjects demonstrate full memory of their actions and often feel intense shame if it's not something they would have otherwise done. The jury is still out on how the influence works, whether it's psychic or empathic, but could be something else entirely. In the meantime, hide your kids, hide your wife, because he's influencing everyone out there. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-076. I like to think of this one as being like a Terminator without the influence of Skynet. Less metal parts too, I guess. 076 is actually classified as two things, a stone cube and the humanoid entity contained within. The cube is covered in engraved patterns with no known origin, with 21 locks on the door. Inside is a human male estimated to be in his late 20s. He's got black hair, gray eyes, and olive skin. All over his body are tattoos depicting arcane and occult imagery. He's commonly referred to as Abel, and for simplicity's sake, I'll refer to him as such. Abel is technically dead while encased in the stone cube. Every once in a while, he will awaken and reanimate with all human vital signs. He'll then seek out the nearest human and enter a rage state in which all humans encountered are fought to the death. The only way to end this rampage is by killing Abel. This proves to be very difficult though, as he possesses superhuman physical abilities and is able to ignore pain and shock. He's been seen carrying on through seemingly deadly injuries, ripping through reinforced security doors, clearing 64 meters in under 3 seconds, taking multiple 50 cal rounds to the head and continuing to fight, swatting lower cal bullets out of the air with rebar, surviving without oxygen for more than an hour, and materializing bladed weapons out of nowhere. Is my Terminator comparison making more sense? Even when he dies, he'll turn to dust and then reform in the coffin over a period of time between 6 hours and 25 years. The lad has nothing but contempt for human beings and will fight tooth and nail to keep killing. There's a weird connection between SCP-076 and 073, and under no circumstances should they be allowed to meet. Here's hoping they keep a close eye on this one, because I'm not down to die gloriously in combat against a superhuman. Not yet, anyways. And finally, number 1, SCP-2440. I am pretty sure that I've already fallen under the influence of this one. Yep. Even before I tell you more, it's likely that you have too. Anyone into SCPs has a higher chance than most to sustain 2440 infection. Let me explain why. This SCP is an extra-dimensional entity whose power increases proportional to the number of people aware of it. Using a mimetic agent that can be inserted into any source of information, this SCP can control the actions of the infected to some degree. Once it reaches a certain level of awareness, it can extend its influence past infected individuals. I'll run down the scale that it seemingly works by. At fewer than 200 infected, the individuals influenced will demonstrate a heightened interest in horror, fantasy, and sci-fi media. They'll express interest in writing and sharing these works, which increases the infection rate. See where I'm going with this? You've probably already stumbled across some of the mimetic agent already. Meme warfare people with horror, sci-fi, and fantasy at the core. Once it amasses over 500 people, it can overtake the body of an infected individual and speak to all infected individuals at the same time. On its journey to 10,000, it gains reality-bending characteristics and becomes capable of manifesting itself outside of a host for short periods of time. Currently, the Foundation believes this SCP to have amassed over 10,000 people, meaning that it can control up to 1,000 individuals at one time. If it keeps up the exponential spread of the mimetic agent, it could control a projected 1 million people. This would lead to an XK class scenario, as the anomaly would be fully capable of manifesting itself outside of a host. We'd all be subject to its powers, and humanity would fall totally under its control. The Foundation is currently administering anti-memetics and amnestics to all found to be connected to this, but it is tough to contain the spread of information. The internet tends to be resistant to censorship after all. An organization known as the Children of God worship 2440 and spread its materials as often as possible. So yeah, I don't know how long we have before this one eclipses the Foundation. Maybe there's Foundation materials already infected by the memetic. In that case, enjoy what time you have left, and prepare to bask in the glory of 2440, our meme god. Seems about right in 2019. Starting us off at number 5, we've got SCP-439. Who here is a fan of the worst torture imaginable? I don't know about you folks, but being immobilized and subjected to immeasurable pain is not exactly my cup of tea. No judgment, everyone's got something, but stick with me and I'll introduce you to an SCP that will make your skin crawl like never before. Actually, I don't know if your skin could crawl after this one's done with you. SCP-439 is a grayish earwig that loves to crawl into the mouths of sleeping humans, all the way down into their lungs. If encountered while awake, it presents no more of a threat than a normal earwig. However, once this thing climbs down a sleeping person's trachea, it will settle in and subject you to a world of hurt. The first few hours after waking, the host will complain of chest pains and shortness of breath, followed by abdominal cramping. This tightness in their chest will worsen and a fever will rise until the host is incapacitated. At this point, the host will develop a disorder that's usually genetic and promotes additional bone growth into people's muscle tissue. This happens very rapidly and is extremely painful, often with bone spurs protruding through the host's flesh. The host will then seek shelter in a dark, enclosed space like a heating duct or a cupboard. In the first 3 days, without treatment, the host will become completely withdrawn and immobile due to pain and difficulty breathing. This is the final stage of the transformation on the host's journey to becoming a bone hive. Let that phrase sit with you for a moment. Bone hive. Okay. The host then enters the fetal position and their skeletal structure shifts until they are roughly spherical in shape, while new protrusions anchor them into place. Now unrecognizable, they've been converted into a sort of cage to protect their internal organs and the bustling new earwig colony within. The earwigs will preserve little bits of the brain and digestive tract to ensure that these organs still function, and they actually use the host's intestines to process materials into a nutritive slurry for the colony. The queen will produce between 20 and 30,000 offsprings as workers, drones, and warriors, just crawling around inside your bony body. Eventually a new queen will emerge and the colony will burst forth from the hive in search of a new host. And when I say burst, I mean they'll actually tear their way out. All but the queen will die over the next little while, and then the host will eventually starve to death. Yes, the host is actually still alive while all of this is happening. Experimentation suggests that they're actually still semi-conscious during the process as well, which a fate worse than death, to say the least. Filling out our number 4 slot, we've got SCP-3199. Colloquially referred to as eggheads, these are big, weird, bald chickens that could very well end the world if left unchecked. These giant humanoid fowl clock in at around 3 meters tall and weigh almost 800 kilograms when fully grown. They're thick. Just look at their SCP picture. They can run at speeds averaging 25 kilometers per hour, and upon contact with a human or animal subject, they will liquefy the internal organs and bone structure. This disgusting cadaver will then be brought and fed to the younger eggheads. Their reproductive cycle is what causes them to be so fearful, as there doesn't seem to be a limit to how many times these things can reproduce. They seem to do this asexually as well, meaning that they can just go on and on without, any other contact. So get this, any instance of 3199, fully grown or not, has an egg in them at all times. They will produce them often through a process in which the egg passes through the stomach, up the esophagus, and then it is vomited out of the mouth along with a viscous red corrosive substance. While this is happening, the chicken folk show extreme discomfort and emit sounds not dissimilar to screams. These large, rubbery off-white eggs are extremely resilient and have proven to be resistant to blunt force trauma, pressure in excess of 180,000 pounds per square inch, high precision blades, and long-term acid exposure. While it's easy enough to dispatch an egg head, the eggs themselves are hard to destroy. And the fact that they can reproduce at extreme rates means that this could easily represent an XK class scenario via overpopulation. Imagine living in a world where everywhere you look you see awful flabby chicken manticores vomiting eggs and acid. Although I wonder if the chickens fry up nice. That could be useful. Coming in at number 3, we have SCP-4616. This one's kind of an odd one, even for an SCP. It's a humanoid entity with superhuman strength and speed, and it actively avoids and destroys any and all surveillance equipment, meaning that nobody has actually acquired any high-resolution images or video of it. Hangs around farmhouses with properties that include wooded areas. It'll chill out at the edge of the woods during the day and wave with its right hand at anyone present, but it'll retreat into the woods if approached. At night, it leaves the woods to inspect the farm. During these expeditions, 4616 will actually do useful farm work. It'll rearrange objects and sometimes damage property and livestock. It will also bang and scrape on the farmhouse trying to gain entry. Any farmhouse resident who's outdoors during the nocturnal excursion will be abducted by the beast. Never taking more than one person during any given night, it will then drag their victim into the woods. Anyone who attempts to leave the property will be abducted as well. In fact, if anyone other than the farm's residents attempt to enter the property, they'll be beaten to a literal pulp. Yes, reports have shown that victims of an attack end up as a semi-fluid pulp. Those are the words that are in the report. Imagine the noises that might make. Just if the farmhouse that it's monitoring becomes empty or otherwise defunct, it will move on to the nearest wooded farmland and begin again. For the longest time, abductees were never recovered from the woods once abducted. However, more recently a ring of 37 oak saplings appeared on the lawn of a Foundation-monitored farmhouse. At the base of each tree was what appeared to be a freshly dug grave, and inside was a well-preserved human body. Acorns had been implanted in the victims while they were still alive, and the tree was allowed to grow within them, developing a complex network of roots deep into their bodies. It's unclear as to how long the victims were alive with the trees growing within them. For now, the Foundation is staffing the current farmhouse with D-class personnel with agriculture experience, cycling new members in via hidden tunnel. They're expected to return to the farmhouse by sunset and remain indoors until sunrise. They've noticed that 4616 has become a little more aggressive though. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-1155. More cursed graffiti, called us street sweepers. 1155 manifests as a work of street art depicting the form of a humanoid owl creature. It has sinewy forelimbs, claw-like hands, and often tends towards a predatory stance with eyes that seem to follow the viewer, kind of like any given portrait in a haunted house. Anyone who sees this image is compelled to investigate more closely, and if they approach within 2 meters, they will be subjected to a violent attack. This attack generally takes around 6 seconds and involves lacerations, dismemberment of extremities, whole or partial removal of soft body parts, and penetrating head trauma consistent with those inflicted by a large beak or talons. These attacks will not occur if the victim remains in sight of another person, and if the sightline is re-established while the attack is underway, it will halt. This is not recommended though, because the victim will die regardless, whether through shock or blood loss. If the attack is allowed to conclude, both victim and painting will vanish. There is yet to be an instance of victim retrieval, but the painting itself will reappear somewhere within 7 days. Whenever discovered, the area surrounding the painting must be quarantined, as completely enclosing it causes the relocation process to happen quickly. If you attempt to destroy or paint over it, it will also relocate. The Foundation constantly observes 1155 from a remote location while doing their best to keep civilians away from danger. Has anyone seen Velvet Buzzsaw? And finally at number 1, we've got SCP-4666. For this last one, let's get into the Christmas spirit, hey folks. 4666 is a long-lived humanoid of unknown origin. It's over 2 meters tall and appears to be an extremely emaciated, naked man of European descent. Capable of instantaneous or near instantaneous teleportation to any location north of 40 degrees north latitude. The Foundation has no idea how to properly contain this one. Every year, this SCP will become active for a period of 12 days between December 21st and January 2nd. This is known as a Weissnacht event. 4666 will appear at dwellings in 1 or more locations, always at family homes and isolated rural areas. The family must have at least 1 child under the age of 8, and that area must have snow cover that lasts the duration of the event. For the first 7 nights, children will report seeing it somewhere near the family dwelling, whether watching from across a field or at the edge of a nearby forest. They will also report waking up and seeing it watching them sleep through the window. Nights 8 through 11 will involve family members hearing footsteps coming from the roof or attic and an unpleasant odor permeating throughout the house. No cause will be found, making the parents suspect that they are being stalked or haunted. On the 12th day of Christmas, 466 gave to me 2 scenarios. The more common scenario involves all family members being killed, save for 1 young child who was then kidnapped. It will inflict incapacitating injuries to the family members while they sleep and then herd them into a single room where it kills them all ritualistically in front of each other. The kidnapped are brought to an unknown location and forced to make toys. If they don't work hard enough, 4666 will kill them or hurt them very badly. The remains are then used to make more toys. Yikes. The less common 12th day involves the family remaining unharmed and the children receiving gifts in the form of toys crafted from these remains of human children. Bad Santa, my ass. This thing gives Krampus a run for its money. Joy to the world and all that jazz. Coming in at number 5, we have SCP-1249. Okay, so at first this one isn't gonna seem too scary. It's a cute little fennec fox. Like, come on, it's adorable. But keep in mind that the Foundation keeps only one of these under lock and key and literally incinerates the rest. Yes, they take these tiny foot-long foxes and they throw them into the incinerator to prevent them from being spread across the world. Why would they do something so barbaric? Well, I'll tell you why. Because these things are dangerous and deadly. While appearing to be identical to a non-anomalous fennec fox, SCP-1249 is comprised entirely of fungal material. This mushroomy stuff has replicated the skin, skeleton, and fur of a fox, while its internal structure consists of a thick mold of varying viscosity. Ugh. It is constantly exhaling a toxin containing heavy amounts of psilocybin and muscimol. So if you take a liking to this fox, and you decide to hang out around it, you'll be exposed to this aerosolized toxin. After 2 minutes of exposure, an exposed subject will enter a consistently increasing state of euphoria until removed from 1249's presence. After 5 minutes, they will become highly resistant to pain and begin to behave similarly to those under the influence of psychedelics. Yeah, this fuzzy little pal will get you high. Some of you might be down for that, but not for what happens next. If the fox sees a subject in this inebriated state, they will lie on or against the subject. Soon after this cuddling begins, 1249's skin will appear to melt and grow over the subject. It will then completely envelop its prey and shift it towards its abdomen. There is no known limit to what this tiny guy can envelop, and it is capable of processing over 190 metric tons of food in 1 week. The oddest thing is that the fox will only eat live prey in this matter. It will eat dead subjects and processed food just like a regular fox would. So if these adorable little rascals were allowed to roam free, they would weasel their way into the homes of cute animal lovers everywhere, take them on a wicked trip, and then eat them. Sounds like a girl I knew in university. Filling out our number 4 slot, we have SCP-1536. These odd little ovals have major implications if you really think about it. Usually they just crawl around on the ground using their 2 weird arthropod legs, but something very interesting happens if they're presented with a direct line of sight to a sufficiently complex moving object. 1536 will alter its composition and appearance to match that of the object, effectively transforming into whatever the target is. While in this active state, it will be identical in every measurable aspect, from DNA to skin markings to even memory and personality. It even has the same life requirements, whether that be food and water, oxygen, etc. If it can sustain itself, 1536 will remain in this transformed state indefinitely, acting just as whatever it copied would. Damage and wounds will be sustained as well, and if the object is killed, it will return to its inactive state. It can't copy something from an image or a recording and needs about 16 minutes to cool down after returning to an inactive state before it can mimic once again. Who knows what these things are thinking when dragging themselves around on the ground prior to transformation? Is there a reason they do this? Do they have some sort of evil agenda? Plus, once a human is copied, it essentially becomes self-sustaining to the same degree that the person it copied is, so it can probably find food and avoid danger. What would happen when 2 of these identical clones come face to face? What if an important public figure is copied and it becomes impossible to tell them apart? What if it copies another extremely volatile SCP? These are questions I definitely don't want the answers to. Keep it locked up, throw away the key. Now at number 3, we have SCP-2774. Do you remember the sloth from Zootopia? Could you live like that every day? Slow reaction times, no emotion, a lack of ability to make high-level decisions. I know I couldn't. But if you ever come in contact with the memetic agent 2774-A, you're gonna end up that way. SCP-2774 is any medium that contains 2774-A, which is a memetic image of an unknown humanoid entity wearing a sloth costume. Once you see this image, the effects will set in between 40 and 100 hours after exposure. Once fully realized, you'll lose all ability to use your cognitive functions or make higher level decisions, save for a period of about 150 seconds every 24 hours. So basically, you're walking around on autopilot with 0 input until you get this short 2.5 minute window. Sounds like hell if I'm gonna be perfectly honest. Subjects who have already been exposed would tell you that it is. During their 150 seconds of lucidity, they're often agitated and fearful, and it's common for sufferers to act irrationally and express dread at the permanence of their situation. More often than not, they will beg someone to kill them or act in ways that would expedite death. At this point, the Foundation has found that the most humane thing to do is terminate the victims. Might be the first truly humane thing the Foundation's ever done. If you're colorblind, count your lucky stars. The image only retains anomalous properties if it contains hues of red and green. And for whatever reason, it has not been found online yet, just in media like movies, TV, and magazines. Home videos too. So all you young folks out there need not worry, the memes on the internet are still safe. Or at least as safe as they were before you knew about this one. Coming in at number 2, SCP-3998. Now this one is a scarecrow made up of very burned human body parts, held together by wicker, nails, and wire. It seems that it originated sometime in the late 17th century, but it still remains very much intact. This burned barnyard accessory constantly exudes flammable liquid from its bones, consisting of human fat and ethanol. Every night between 11 PM and 4 AM, 3998 ignites and is engulfed in flame. Even though the flames are quite intense, it sustains no structural damage. If nobody's nearby, it's no big deal. But if somebody is nearby and meets a set of criteria, they will also spontaneously ignite. As they burn, large quantities of ethanol will appear and start to boil in their stomach, inducing vomiting and causing further external burns, nerve damage, and organ damage. Eventually their body fat will begin to melt, and if they're left to burn long enough, the melted fat-ethanol combo will cause the stomach to violently rupture, often splitting the victim in two. These flames cannot be extinguished until 3998 is also extinguished. So that's pretty violent, right? Burning to death while vomiting ethanol? Well, thankfully, if you're a nice person, it won't affect you. It appears that only people who have killed or physically abused a romantic partner are targeted by these effects. So honestly, this thing's doing us all a favor. Although, if it appeared in a city center, we might have an issue. It could burn the whole place to the ground. And finally, at number 1, SCP-2852. Now this one is really terrifying to me, even though I don't consider myself any of the denominations it targets. This SCP will show up to various Catholic and Anglican religious functions, and even though it has never been seen by any attendees before, it will be treated like an established member of the family. 2852 looks like a white, middle-aged male and is comprised of human cells. However, it has no identifiable organs and its eyes are set into the sockets without any nerve connections. They're just kind of rolling around in there. It also speaks in a word salad. It never makes any sense, but all who interact with it will perceive it as acting normally and speaking intelligently. They'll also always refer to it as Cousin Johnny. Okay. Different terrible things will happen when it appears at baptisms, weddings, or funerals, known as blue, white, and black events respectively. The Foundation has attempted to restrict their access to events in the past, but they'll just appear inside if they're barred from entry. Depending on the event, strange things will happen when this SCP appears. Sometimes a bridal party will remove all their teeth and feed them to newlyweds. Sometimes blood is vomited into an open casket along with cicada guts. And sometimes a child's skin will slip off as if they were molting. No matter what, all in attendance will be negatively affected in major ways, ranging from higher suicide rates to sterility to developing violent personality disorders. It's actually theorized that a great deal of D-class subjects have actually been involved in these events in the past, which is why they act the way they do. Oof, it just sends a shiver down my spine knowing that any event could be attended by one of these things, and there's really nothing that can be done about it. Plus, the eating of teeth really messes me up. Just imagine chewing on a tooth for a moment. No. Keep these people impersonators away. Yikes. All sorts of stuff you would rather the Foundation just incinerated like a fennec fox, right? But hey, that's the kind of world we live in.